The first thing you feel is the silence. It drops like a stone after the laughter dies down. Clara stood on that dusty train platform in Colorado, a place that was supposed to be a new beginning, and all she could hear was the echo of her own humiliation. 50 years old, a lifetime spent waiting for a door to open, only to have it slammed and bolted in her face for the whole world to see. The station clerk, a boy with pimples and a nervous twitch, couldn't even look at her. He just folded the letter, the weapon that had just murdered her hope, and tucked it away. The words still hung in the air, thick and poisoned. She is simply too fat. I cannot marry such a woman. A few people were still snickering. A woman in a fine bonnet pulled her child closer, as if Clara's disappointment was a disease you could catch. Clara just stood there, clutching the handle of her single, worn suitcase. Inside it was everything she owned: a few dresses, a Bible, and a stack of letters tied with a ribbon. Letters filled with promises. Letters from a man named Jasper. She hadn't cried. She'd learned decades ago that tears only invited more scorn. So she swallowed the pain. It felt like swallowing broken glass. Her last chance at a family, at belonging, at not dying alone. It had all just vanished. But here's the thing about rock bottom. Sometimes you find something unexpected in the dust, and as the last of the judgmental crowd turned to leave, one person didn't. One person started walking toward her. He was a tall man, weathered by the sun, his face a road map of hard years. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes held a strange kind of understanding. He kept walking, his boots kicking up little puffs of dirt. And with every step he took, the story of what happened that day began to change. The story everyone thought they had just witnessed, the public shaming of a lonely old woman, wasn't the real story at all. It was just the beginning. Clara had spent her life being invisible, or worse, being seen for the one thing people chose to judge: her size. Back home, she was that poor Clara, the spinster who helped with church bake sales and nursed her ailing parents until they were gone. The whispers followed her everywhere. Too large for a husband. Such a shame. Those words became her cage. She learned to live inside it, to make it her home. She ate her meals alone, walked her paths alone, and dreamed her dreams alone. Then the letters started. From a man named Jasper in Silver Creek, Colorado. A silver miner, he'd said. A man who was also lonely. His words were a cool drink of water in a desert. He didn't talk about appearances. He talked about companionship, about building a quiet life, about having someone to share the sunsets with. For the first time in 50 years, Clara allowed herself to hope. She sent him a photograph. It was true. But it was an old one, from 20 years ago. She was younger then, and yes, she was slimmer. It was a lie, a small, desperate lie, born of a lifetime of being told the truth of her body was unacceptable. She prayed he would see the woman in the picture, and that, by the time she arrived, he would see the heart of the woman standing before him. She had sold everything she had, her parents' small house, the furniture, every last trinket, to buy the train ticket west. It was the biggest gamble of her life. She was betting everything on Jasper. When the train hissed to a stop, her heart was a hummingbird in her chest. She scanned the platform, looking for the man from the letters. But he wasn't there. Only the station clerk with that sealed envelope. He'd cleared his throat, his voice unnaturally loud. "A message for Miss Clara May Thompson," he'd announced, and the whole platform had turned to watch. He'd read the words, and the world had collapsed. Now, standing in the ruins, Clara saw the tall man stop just a few feet away from her. He had 2 young boys with him, little carbon copies of himself with dusty clothes and serious eyes. They were watching her too, but not with pity or disgust. With something else. Curiosity. The man tipped his hat. His voice was low and steady, like a slow-moving river. "Ma'am," he said. Just that. Clara flinched, expecting another blow. The man knelt down. The cruel letter lay crumpled on the ground where the clerk had dropped it. He picked it up, not even glancing at the words written on it. He just held it in his big, calloused hand, and then he did something that made the air crackle. He tore it in half. Then he tore the halves into quarters. He shredded Jasper's judgment into tiny, meaningless pieces and let them fall into the dirt. That, he said, looking up at her, his eyes clear and direct, is not a thing a man should ever write, and it's not a thing a woman should ever have to read. He stood up, dusting his hands. My name is Thomas, Thomas Brody, and these are my sons, Caleb and Luke. Clara couldn't find her voice. It was trapped somewhere in her throat, behind all the unshed tears. Thomas looked at his boys. This is Miss Clara, he said, his voice firm, loud enough for the few remaining onlookers to hear. She's come a long way, and she might be just who we've been looking for. Lightning, that's what it felt like. Not pity, not charity, a lifeline. The youngest boy, Luke, took a hesitant step forward. He reached out a small, grubby hand and touched her arm, his eyes wide and trusting. In that one small touch, a seed of hope, buried so deep Clara had forgotten it was there, began to stir. Thomas hadn't offered to rescue her. He had offered her a place. He had looked at the woman the entire town had just dismissed, and he had seen a beginning. The laughter was gone. Now there was only a stunned, confused silence. Why would Thomas Brody, a respected rancher, a man who kept to himself since his wife passed, align himself with this outcast? Clara's mind was reeling. A trap. It had to be a trap. Kindness, in her experience, was often just a different kind of cruelty in disguise. What? What did you say? She whispered, her voice hoarse. Thomas didn't answer with words. He simply held out his hand. It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation. Our ranch is just outside of town, he said, his voice calm and even. It's not much, but it's quiet. We can get you settled before nightfall. She stared at his hand. It was rough, scarred from work, but it was steady. This couldn't be real. People didn't do this. Not for her. He must have seen the doubt warring in her eyes. Ma'am, he said softly, I don't know what was in that letter, and I don't care. What I do know is that no one deserves to be left alone on a train platform 1,000 miles from home. Let us at least offer you a roof for the night. You can decide what to do tomorrow. It was the logic that broke through her fear. A roof for the night. A safe place to breathe. She could think tomorrow. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, a silent promise of safety. Caleb, Thomas said, turning to his older son, help Miss Clara with her bag. The boy, who looked to be about 12, nodded seriously. He walked over and hefted her suitcase as if it were a great treasure. The younger one, Luke, stayed close to Clara, his small hand now gripping a fold of her skirt. Together, the four of them walked away from the station. Clara didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see the pointing fingers, to hear the whispers that were surely starting up again. She just focused on the feel of Thomas's hand in hers, the solid presence of the boys beside her, and the rhythmic sound of their boots on the dusty road. They had left the town and its judgment behind. But Clara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the whispers would follow. A man like Thomas Brody didn't just invite a strange, disgraced woman into his home without a reason, and whatever that reason was, she was walking right into the middle of it. The road to the ranch was a winding dirt path that snaked through rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and pine. Thomas put Clara on his horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, and he walked alongside, one hand resting lightly on the saddle. The boys trailed behind, quiet as mice, but their eyes missed nothing. Clara felt exposed, perched up on the horse for all to see. Every passing rider, every distant farmhouse, felt like a pair of accusing eyes. She was the fat woman from the train station, the one who was publicly rejected. Now she was with the grieving widower, Thomas Brodie. The town would be a hornet's nest of gossip by morning. Thomas seemed completely untroubled by this. He spoke not of the station, not of Jasper, but of the land. He pointed out a hawk circling high overhead. He showed her the creek where his boys fished for trout. He talked about the long winters and the surprisingly beautiful spring thaws. He was giving her a new world to look at, trying to erase the memory of the one that had just tried to break her. But a new thought, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through Clara's weary mind. What if this was all a performance? What if Thomas's kindness was a mask for something else? Maybe he was a lonely man, yes, but perhaps he was also a desperate one. A man with 2 boys to raise, a ranch to run, who needed a housekeeper, a cook, a worker. Maybe he hadn't seen a woman to respect. Maybe he'd just seen a pair of hands, hands that belonged to someone with nowhere else to go, who would be too grateful to ask for wages. The thought soured the beautiful scenery. She pulled her hand back from the saddle horn, her posture stiffening. She had traded one kind of humiliation for another, public scorn for quiet servitude. The sun was bleeding orange and purple across the sky when they finally arrived. The ranch was nestled in a small valley, a simple wooden house with a porch and a stone chimney puffing out a thin curl of smoke. A few cows grazed in a nearby pasture, and chickens pecked at the dirt in a fenced-in yard. It was humble, a world away from the prosperity Jasper's letters had hinted at. But unlike Jasper's promises, this place was real. It felt peaceful. "We're home," Thomas said, and the simple words lodged in Clara's throat. Inside, the house was clean but bare. It was a man's house, a house without a woman's touch for a long, long time. While Thomas saw to the horse, Caleb began to set the table with tin plates, and Luke fetched water from a pump in the kitchen. They moved with a practiced, somber efficiency that spoke of years of fending for themselves. Thomas showed Clara to a small room at the back of the house. It had a narrow bed with a handmade quilt, a small washstand, and a single window that looked out onto the mountains. "This will be yours," he said. "It ain't much, but it's clean. The door locks from the inside." That last part caught her attention. The door locks from the inside. He was telling her she was safe. Safe from what? From him? The thought was both reassuring and terrifying. He was a stranger. She was a woman alone. In this wild country, that was a dangerous combination. He left her to settle in, and she stood in the middle of the small room, her heart pounding. She looked at her reflection in the wavy glass of the window. She saw a tired, frightened woman with graying hair and eyes full of suspicion. She had survived the platform. Now she had to survive the rescue. And as she heard the low murmur of Thomas's voice in the other room, talking to his sons, she realized a chilling truth. She knew nothing about this man. She didn't know how his wife died. She didn't know if his kindness was genuine. She didn't even know if he was the one who had written to her in the first place, luring her here for some unknown purpose. The handwriting on the letters. She had to check the handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened her suitcase. She pulled out the stack of Jasper's letters, the ones filled with such gentle words. She fumbled with the ribbon, her fingers clumsy with dread. She found the first letter, the one that had started it all, and smoothed it out. Then she froze. She didn't need to see the cruel letter from the station to know. She didn't need to compare a single word, because as she looked at the elegant, flowing script on the page, she realized something that made the blood drain from her face. This wasn't a man's handwriting. The letters, the beautiful, hopeful letters from Jasper the miner, had been written by a woman. The world tilted on its axis. A woman? Why would a woman pretend to be a man looking for a wife? It made no sense. It was a prank, then. A cruel, elaborate prank played by some bored, malicious woman in this desolate town. The thought was somehow even more humiliating than Jasper's rejection. To be the butt of a joke so twisted. Clara sank onto the bed, the letters scattered around her. Her mind raced, trying to piece it together. The elegant handwriting, the poetic phrases, the deep understanding of loneliness that had resonated so strongly with her. It was all a lie, a fabrication designed to build her up just to watch her fall. A wave of nausea washed over her. She felt like a fool, a pathetic, gullible old woman. A soft knock came at her door. "Miss Clara!" It was Thomas. Supper's on the table. She couldn't move. She couldn't face him. Not now, not when she felt so utterly broken and deceived. "Miss Clara?" he called again, a note of concern in his voice. She had to say something. She took a deep, shaky breath. I'm not hungry, thank you." There was a pause on the other side of the door. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she lied, her voice thin and brittle. "Just tired from the journey." She heard his footsteps retreat. A few moments later, she heard the quiet clink of forks against tin plates. The family was eating without her. She was separate, alone, just as she'd always been. She stayed in that room for what felt like hours, staring at the wall as darkness fell outside her window. The lie of the letters was a cancer, eating away at her. Who in this town hated her so much? A woman she had never even met. Eventually, the house grew quiet. The boys were in bed. She heard the soft creak of floorboards as Thomas moved around, banking the fire for the night. Then silence. She couldn't stay in this room. It felt like a coffin. She needed air. Quietly, she unlocked her door and crept out into the main room. The fire in the hearth cast long, dancing shadows. The house was still and peaceful. She made her way to the front door, easing it open, and stepped out onto the porch. The night sky was a revelation. A black velvet cloth sprayed with a million glittering diamonds, more stars than she had ever seen in her life. The air was cool and smelled of pine and damp earth. She wrapped her arms around herself, breathing it in, trying to calm the storm inside her. Couldn't sleep either. The voice came from the darkness at the far end of the porch. Thomas was sitting in a rocking chair, a silhouette against the star-dusted mountains. He wasn't holding a rifle, but she knew one was likely leaning just inside the door. He was watching over his house, over his sons, over her. She jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." "You're not disturbing me," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Sometimes the night is more peaceful than the day." He was silent for a moment. "It wasn't just the journey, was it? Something else is troubling you." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He saw too much. She could lie again. She could retreat back to her room and her misery. Or she could take another gamble, a bigger one than the train ticket. She could trust this man with a small piece of the truth. "The letters," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The ones that brought me here. I think they were a lie. All of it." Thomas stopped rocking. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. She expected him to ask what she meant, to press for details. He didn't. "I know," he said softly into the darkness. Clara's blood ran cold. "What?" "I know they were a lie," he repeated, his voice laced with a deep, weary sadness. He turned his head, and even in the dim starlight, she could see the pain in his eyes. "Because my wife, Sarah, she was the one who wrote them." The porch seemed to fall away beneath Clara's feet. His wife? His dead wife? It was impossible. The letters had been arriving for months. Thomas had said his wife had been gone for years. I I don't understand, she stammered. You said your wife passed away. She did, Thomas said, his gaze fixed on some distant, unseen point in the darkness. 3 years ago. The fever took her. Then how? Thomas finally looked at her, his expression a mixture of grief and something else. Something that looked like guilt. Sarah was a teacher back east before we came out here. She loved to write. She believed in, well, she believed in second chances. Before she got sick, she was corresponding with a dozen women like you. Lonely women, spinsters, widows. Women who deserved a good life, a good husband. He took a deep breath. She would write to them on behalf of the single men in this territory. Miners, ranchers, blacksmiths. She was a matchmaker of a sort. She'd find a good man who was lonely, and she'd find a good woman who was lonely, and she'd help them find each other. She wrote the letters for them, you see, made them sound more poetic than most of these fellas could manage on their own. Clara's head was spinning. So, Jasper is a real person. Oh, he's real, all right, Thomas said, and for the first time a hard, bitter edge crept into his voice. Jasper Thorne. He owns the big silver mine just north of town, richest man in the county, and the cruelest. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture that was more horrifying than any simple prank. My Sarah, Thomas continued, his voice dropping low. She thought she could find the good in any man. She started writing to you on Jasper's behalf. Jasper knew about it. He played along. He let her write the letters, let her send you the ticket money he provided. He wanted a wife, and Sarah was going to find him the perfect one. He paused, the silence heavy with unspoken tragedy. But Sarah never got to finish what she started. The fever came on fast. In her last days, she made me promise. She said, Thomas, see it through. Get that woman, Clara, out here safely. Jasper needs a good heart to soften him. I promised her I would. He looked down at his hands. I failed. After she passed, I was lost in my own grief. I couldn't face it. I let the months slip by. I never contacted you. I never contacted Jasper. I just stopped. I hoped you'd just give up, that you wouldn't come. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. So that letter at the station, Jasper wrote that. He wrote it, Thomas confirmed, his voice tight with anger. He must have found out you were finally on your way, and he did that. Humiliated you in front of the whole town, for sport. That's the kind of man he is. He turned my wife's dying wish into a cruel spectacle. Now Clara understood. Thomas's kindness wasn't random. It wasn't charity. It was atonement. He was trying to fix the mistake he had made, to honor the promise he had broken to his dead wife. She wasn't a stranger to him. She was his wife's last project. She was his unfinished business. And she had just walked into a war she knew nothing about. A war between a grieving husband and the cruelest man in the county. The revelation left Clara breathless. She was a pawn in a game that had started long before she ever boarded that train. Thomas wasn't just a kind stranger. He was a man bound by a promise to his dead wife. And Jasper Thorne wasn't just a cruel suitor. He was a powerful enemy who had used that promise to inflict pain. Why? Clara whispered into the night. Why would he do it? If he didn't want to marry me, why not just send a quiet telegram? Why the public humiliation? Thomas let out a long, slow breath. Because it's not about you, Clara. Not really, it's about me. Jasper and I. We have a history. He wants my land. This ranch has the best water rights in the valley, and his mine needs water. He's been trying to buy me out for years. When I refuse, he finds other ways to make my life difficult. He gestured vaguely toward the darkness. He thinks if he can isolate me, break my spirit, I'll finally sell. Humiliating you was a message to the whole town. It was Jasper showing everyone that I am cursed, that my wife's last good deed ended in disgrace. He wants people to see me as a broken man, a fool who can't even protect his own family's honor. Clara's heart ached, not just for herself, but for this man. He was carrying the weight of his wife's death, his broken promise, and now this calculated attack from a relentless enemy. And he had taken her in, adding her burden to his own. "You should have left me at the station," she said softly. "You have your boys to think of. Bringing me here, it will only make him target you more." "Let him try," Thomas said, and the steel returned to his voice. "He can have my land when he pries it from my cold, dead hands. My wife loved this place. My boys were born here. I'm not running." He looked at her, his eyes intense in the starlight. "And I'm not letting him run you off either. You are here because of my wife. That makes you my responsibility. You are under my protection now." The words hung in the air between them. Under my protection. For 50 years, no one had ever said that to Clara. She had always been the one who had to be strong, to protect herself from the world's casual cruelty. Now this grieving, embattled man was standing as a shield between her and an enemy she had yet to meet. She felt a flicker of warmth in her chest, a feeling she couldn't name. It wasn't love. It wasn't even hope, not yet. It was something quieter. It was the feeling of not being entirely alone in the storm. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice stronger now. "For tonight we rest," Thomas said, standing up from his chair. "In the morning we start living. We work the ranch. We raise the boys. We show Jasper and this whole town that we are not broken." He walked to the door and paused, turning back to her. "He wanted to make you a symbol of shame. Instead, we'll make you a symbol of strength." He went inside, leaving Clara alone on the porch with the stars and the enormity of his words. A symbol of strength. Could she be that, after a lifetime of feeling weak? She looked out at the dark, silent ranch. This wasn't just a refuge anymore. It was a battleground. And Thomas Brody hadn't just offered her a roof. He had offered her a side. As she finally went back inside, locking her bedroom door, she realized the cruel letter at the station was no longer the end of her story. It was a declaration of war. And Thomas Brody had just enlisted her as his first and only soldier. The question was, did she have what it took to fight? The next morning, the smell of coffee and frying bacon pulled Clara from a restless sleep. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The familiar scent, a ghost from a life that was no longer hers. Then the reality of the small room, the strange quilt, and the looming mountains outside her window came crashing back. She dressed quickly and went into the main room. Thomas was at the stove, a white apron tied around his lean waist. Caleb was feeding wood into the fire, and Luke was sitting at the table, carefully pouring milk into 3 tin cups. They moved together in a quiet, practiced rhythm, a family missing a crucial piece. "Morning, Clara," Thomas said, not turning around. He'd called her Clara, not Miss Clara. "Coffee's hot. Breakfast is almost ready." It felt so normal, so domestic, that it was jarring. Just last night he had told her they were in a silent war with the most powerful man in the county. This morning he was making breakfast. She sat at the table and Luke pushed a cup of milk toward her. "For you," he mumbled, his eyes cast down. "Thank you, Luke," she said, and his ears turned pink. The meal was eaten in near silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the quiet of people who were used to each other, who didn't need to fill the air with chatter. Clara watched Thomas with his sons. He was a good father, gentle but firm. He listened to Caleb's whispered story about a hawk he'd seen, and he ruffled Luke's hair when the boy spilled a drop of milk. In the daylight, she could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes. This man was holding his world together with sheer force of will. After breakfast, Thomas laid out the day. Caleb, The fence line near the creek needs checking. Take the tools and watch for rattlers. Luke, you're on chicken duty. Make sure the coop is secure before you let them out. The coyotes have been getting bold." The boys nodded and went to their chores without a word of complaint. Then Thomas turned to her. "Clara, I don't expect you to work. You are my guest. You can rest, you can read. Do as you please." But Clara hadn't survived 50 years by sitting still. "A guest doesn't stay forever, Thomas," she said, meeting his gaze. "If I'm to be here, I need to earn my keep. Show me what needs doing." A small, weary smile touched his lips. "All right," he said. "There's a pile of mending in the basket by the hearth that would scare a saint. And the vegetable garden has been overrun with weeds since—" He trailed off. "Since Sarah died. I can mend and I can weed," Clara said simply. And so her new life began. It was a life of hard, physical work. She patched the holes in the boys' worn shirts, her needle moving with a skill learned over decades of lonely evenings. She attacked the neglected garden with a vengeance, her hands sinking into the cool, dark earth, pulling up weeds as if she were pulling out the roots of her own pain. She cooked for them, simple, hearty meals that made the boys' eyes light up. She was strong. Her body, which had been a source of shame for so long, was a source of power here. She could haul buckets of water without tiring. She could hoist sacks of feed that made Thomas grunt with effort. She worked from sunup to sundown, fueled by a fierce, unspoken need to prove her worth, to prove that she was not a burden. Thomas watched her. He didn't say much, but she saw the respect growing in his eyes. He stopped calling her his guest and started calling her his partner. "Clara, can you give me a hand with this?" "Clara, what do you think we should plant here?" Slowly, cautiously, the house began to change. A woman's touch, yes, but more than that. It was Clara's touch. She put a jar of wildflowers on the table. She scrubbed the floors until the wood gleamed. She organized the pantry. She wasn't just occupying a space, she was making a home. The boys blossomed under her care. Caleb, so serious and watchful, started talking to her, telling her about the ranch, about his father, about his mother. He told her how his mother used to read to them by the fire every night. So one evening, after the supper dishes were cleared away, Clara picked up the worn copy of Treasure Island from the mantelpiece. "Come on, you two," she said. "Let's see what Long John Silver is up to." They gathered by the fire, the boys on the floor at her feet, Thomas in his chair, pretending to clean a rifle but listening to every word. She read, her voice steady and warm, and for an hour they were all transported to a world of pirates and buried gold. When she finished the chapter, Luke was fast asleep with his head in her lap. Caleb looked up at her, his eyes shining in the firelight. "Thank you," he whispered. "We haven't done that since Mama—" A lump formed in Clara's throat. She gently stroked Luke's hair. Thomas was watching her, his face unreadable. In that moment, she wasn't an outcast or a burden. She was needed. But the peace of the ranch was a fragile illusion. The war with Jasper Thorne was quiet, but it was not over. One afternoon, Thomas came riding back from town, his face like a thundercloud. He dismounted and strode into the house without a word. "What is it?" Clara asked, her heart beginning to pound. "It's the credit line," he said, his voice raw with fury. "Miller at the general store. He's cut me off, said I'm too much of a risk." "But you've been trading with him for years." "I have," Thomas said, slamming his hat down on the table. "But Jasper Thorne owns the building Miller rents, and Jasper Thorne just happened to have a little chat with him this morning. This is how he works. He's choking me off. No supplies, no feed for the winter. He's trying to starve us out." Clara looked at the pantry she had so carefully organized. It was decently stocked for now, but it wouldn't last the winter. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. Jasper wasn't just a bully. He was a strategist, and he was methodically cutting them off from the rest of the world. She was no longer just a pawn. She was a liability. Her presence here was accelerating Thomas's ruin. The thought was unbearable. That night, after the boys were asleep, she found Thomas on the porch again, staring out at the darkness. "This is my fault," she said, standing behind him. "He's doing this because of me. I should leave, Thomas. I can find work in another town. I'll be all right." He didn't turn around. "No, but he'll ruin you. For me, a woman you've known for a few weeks." "He's not going to ruin me," Thomas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And this stopped being just about you the moment he used my wife's memory as a weapon. This is about my home, my family." He finally turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a cold fire she had never seen before. "And you are part of this family now, Clara. We don't abandon family." His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. "You are part of this family now." But as she looked at his determined, stubborn face, she saw something else flicker in his eyes. It was a deep, hidden fear. He was putting up a brave front, but he knew, just as she did, that they were trapped. Jasper Thorne held all the cards. He owned the town, he had the money, and he was patient. He would squeeze and squeeze until Thomas had no choice but to break. And then Clara had an idea. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only weapon she had. "Thomas," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "Jasper Thorne thinks I am a weak, foolish old woman. He thinks you're hiding me out of pity. He's wrong." He looked at her, confused. "I have something," she said, her mind racing. "Something from my past, a skill he won't be expecting." She took a deep breath. "Before my parents got sick, I wasn't just a spinster. For 10 years, I was a bookkeeper for a very large and very corrupt shipping company back east." Thomas stared at her, the pieces slowly starting to click into place. "I know numbers," Clara said, a spark of defiance igniting within her. "I know how greedy men hide their money. I know how to read a ledger like a storybook, and I am willing to bet that a man like Jasper Thorne, a man who built an empire this quickly, has some secrets in his books." She had run from that life, from the corruption and the danger that came with knowing too much. She had come west to be small, to be invisible. But Jasper Thorne had refused to let her be invisible. He had put her on a stage for the whole world to see. Fine. It was time to give them a show. Thomas's expression shifted from weary defiance to sharp, focused intensity. He saw what she was offering. Not a plea for help, but a plan of attack. "A bookkeeper," he repeated softly, testing the word. It seemed so at odds with the woman who had arrived on the train, so vulnerable and alone. "You think you can find something? Something we can use against him?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "But rich men who get rich fast are always careless. They think no one is smart enough to catch them. They leave tracks. The question is, how do we get a look at his books?" That was the problem. Jasper Thorne's office was in the mining company headquarters, a fortress-like building in the center of town. It would be guarded day and night. A frontal assault was impossible. They needed a way in. "I might know a way," Thomas said after a long silence. He started pacing the length of the porch, his mind clearly working. "There's a man, Sam. He's one of Jasper's shift supervisors at the mine. He owes me a favor. A big one. My wife Sarah nursed his daughter through the pox a few years back. Saved her life. Sam has never forgotten it." "Do you trust him?" Clara asked. "I trust that he loved his daughter," Thomas said. "And I trust that he hates Jasper Thorne. Jasper pays his men poorly and works them to the bone. Sam stays because he has a family to feed. But if he had a chance to hurt Jasper without getting his own hands dirty, he might take it." The plan was audacious. Thomas would approach Sam, call in the life debt, and ask him to get them access to Jasper's office. It was a huge risk. If Sam betrayed them, Jasper would know they were coming for him. He would crush them without a second thought. For the next 2 days, an unspoken tension hung over the ranch. Thomas was gone for most of that time, leaving Clara with the boys and a list of chores. She worked mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She was terrified. She had offered up her one secret, her one weapon, and now their fate rested in the hands of a man she had never met. She watched the boys, Caleb and Luke, going about their day, blissfully unaware of the dangerous game the adults were playing. She felt a fierce wave of protectiveness wash over her. She had come to care for these children, for their quiet, grieving father. This was no longer just about her own survival. It was about theirs. On the evening of the second day, Thomas returned. He was mud-splattered and looked bone-weary, but as he stepped into the lamplight of the kitchen, Clara saw a glint in his eye. "Sam is in," he said, his voice low. "It took some convincing, but he's in. He says there's a 2-hour window. Tomorrow night." During the shift change, the main office is empty. Jasper goes to the saloon, and the night watchman doesn't start his rounds until 10. "Sam can get a door unlocked for us, but we'll only have one shot at this." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "You can't go alone," Thomas said firmly. "I'll go with you. I'll stand watch." "No," Clara said, her voice shaking but resolute. "You can't. If you're seen, if we're caught, what happens to the boys? They'll have no one. I have to do this alone. I'm the one they won't be looking for. I'm just the poor, fat woman Thomas Brody took in. I'm invisible. I can use that." They argued, their voices hushed but intense. Clara had never stood up to a man like this before, but she was unmovable. The risk was hers to take. She had brought this trouble to his door, and she would be the one to face it. Finally, reluctantly, Thomas agreed. He drew her a rough map of the mining office layout based on Sam's description. He showed her where the ledger room was, where Jasper's private office was. The main ledger might have something, Clara mused, looking at the map. Payroll discrepancies, shipping costs that don't add up. But the real secrets, the ones he doesn't want anyone to see, those will be in his private office. "Sam says he keeps a personal journal," Thomas added, "a small leather-bound book. He keeps it locked in his desk drawer." "Then that's what I'll go for," Clara said. The next night, the air was thick with impending thunder. The sky was a bruised purple, and a nervous wind rustled the leaves. After putting the boys to bed, Clara changed into her darkest dress. Thomas handed her a small satchel. Inside was a crowbar and a set of lockpicks he had fashioned from wire. "I never asked where you learned to do that," she said, looking at the picks. "You learn a lot of things you don't want to out here," he said, his face grim. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his grip tight. "Clara, if anything feels wrong, you get out. You run. Don't stop for anything. Do you understand?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He rode with her to the edge of town, where they tethered the horse in a thicket of trees. "I'll be waiting right here," he said. "Don't be a hero." She slipped into the shadows of Silver Creek. The town was alive with loud music and laughter spilling from the saloons. She kept to the back alleys, her heart pounding with every dog's bark, every shuttered window she passed. She was an unlikely spy, a 50-year-old woman on a mission to ruin the man who had tried to ruin her. She found the mining office easily. It was a large, imposing stone building. Just as Sam had promised, a small side door was unlocked. She slipped inside, her breath catching in her chest. The building was silent, smelling of cold stone and ink. Following the map in her mind, she found her way to Jasper's office. The door was locked. She took out the picks Thomas had made, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold them. It took her 10 agonizing minutes, her ears straining for the sound of footsteps, but finally she heard a soft click. The lock gave way. She was in. The office was opulent, a stark contrast to Thomas's humble ranch, a huge mahogany desk, leather chairs, a thick carpet on the floor. She went straight to the desk. The main drawer was locked, just as Sam had said. This time she didn't bother with the picks. She took the small crowbar and, with a grunt of effort, pried the drawer open with a sickening crack of splintering wood. And there it was, a small, black leather book, Jasper Thorne's private journal. She opened it. The handwriting was a jagged, angry scrawl. She quickly scanned the pages, her eyes searching for names, numbers, anything that looked out of place. She saw entries about mine production, payrolls, shipping manifests. And then she saw a name that made her stop breathing. Sarah Brody. Her eyes devoured the words. The entry was dated just over 3 years ago. S. Brody getting weaker. The doctor says a few more days. The fool Thomas still thinks it's the fever. He has no idea about the special medicine I've been having the doc give her. A little bit of poison in her tea each day does wonders for clearing the way for progress. Once she's gone, her bleeding heart influence will be over, and her husband will be broken. He'll sell the ranch in a year. The water rights will be mine. Clara felt the room spin. It wasn't the fever. Jasper Thorne hadn't just used Sarah's memory as a weapon. He had murdered her. A cold, pure rage, unlike anything Clara had ever felt, washed through her. This wasn't about humiliation anymore. This wasn't about land or water rights. This was about murder. This was about a good woman being slowly poisoned by a monster while her husband and children watched, helpless. She had the proof right here in her hands. This journal would destroy him. She tucked the book into her satchel and turned to leave. And that's when she heard it. The sound of a key turning in the main office door lock. Someone was coming. It wasn't 10 o'clock yet. The watchman was early. Or worse, it wasn't the watchman at all. Panic seized her. There was no other way out. The windows were barred. She looked wildly around the room and saw the one possible hiding place. A tall, deep wardrobe in the corner of the room where Jasper likely hung his coats. She scrambled inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind her, leaving just a tiny crack to see through. She held her breath, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. The office door opened. A man stepped in, holding a lantern. It wasn't the town's night watchman. It was the pimply-faced station clerk, the same boy who had read her letter of rejection. But he wasn't alone. Another figure followed him in. A tall man with a cruel sneer and cold, dead eyes. Jasper Thorne. "You're sure you saw him?" Jasper's voice was like gravel grinding together. Yes, Mr. Thorne," the clerk stammered. "It was Brody, all right. I saw him riding toward town with that woman. He left her at the edge of town and waited. She came in this direction." Jasper swept the room with his gaze. His eyes landed on his desk. He saw the splintered, broken drawer. A low growl escaped his throat. "So," he hissed, "the little mouse decided to show some teeth." He walked over to the desk, his movements calm and predatory. He saw the empty space where his journal used to be. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. He sent the fat cow to do his dirty work, he mused to himself. Clever, but not clever enough. He turned to the clerk. "They know. They have the book. Find her. She can't have gone far. Block the alleys. Get the sheriff. He knows who signs his paychecks. I want her and I want that book. And when you find her, don't bring her back here. Take her to the old stamping mill by the creek. No one will hear her scream." The clerk scurried out of the room like a frightened rat. Jasper remained. He walked around the room, the lantern light casting his monstrous shadow against the walls. He was checking the windows, the fireplace flue, looking for any possible escape route she might have taken. Clara stood frozen in the wardrobe, clutching the journal to her chest. Her mind was a whirlwind of terror. She was trapped. The whole town was about to be turned upside down looking for her. The sheriff was in Jasper's pocket. Thomas was waiting for her, walking right into a trap. Jasper stopped, his back to the wardrobe only a few feet away. He let out a soft, cruel chuckle. "You can't hide forever, Clara," he said, his voice soft and conversational, as if he were speaking to someone right beside him. "You came all this way for a new life, and I'm going to be the one to give it to you. A short one." He turned and walked toward the door. For a heart-stopping second she thought he was leaving, but he paused, his hand on the doorknob. Then he turned back, his eyes slowly scanning the room one last time. His gaze swept past the chairs, the desk, the fireplace, and then his eyes locked directly onto the wardrobe. He smiled. "There you are." He knew. Clara's world narrowed to the thin crack in the wardrobe door. Jasper's cold, triumphant eyes stared right at her. He didn't lunge. He didn't shout. He just stood there, savoring the moment. The cat that had cornered the mouse. Come out, wherever you are," he taunted, his voice a low purr. Clara's mind raced faster than it ever had in her life. Run, fight, scream, all would lead to the same end. The stamping mill, silence, the journal. The book in her satchel was her only weapon, but it was useless if she was dead. She had to get it to Thomas. She had to get it out of this room. Jasper took a slow step toward the wardrobe. Then another. In that split second, Clara made a choice. She wouldn't be a victim. She wouldn't be a mouse. She would be the distraction. With a primal scream of fury and terror, she shoved the wardrobe door open with all her strength. The heavy oak door slammed into Jasper, catching him off guard. He stumbled back with a curse, the lantern flying from his hand. It hit the floor and shattered, the flame instantly igniting the thick carpet. Flames erupted, licking up the drapes behind Jasper's desk. Clara didn't wait to see what happened next. She bolted. She ran past the stunned, enraged Jasper and out of the office, down the dark hallway, and burst out the side door into the alley. Shouts erupted behind her. "There she is! Stop her!" She ran, fueled by pure adrenaline. Her lungs burned, her side ached, but she didn't slow down. She could hear footsteps pounding on the cobblestones behind her. She risked a glance over her shoulder. It was the station clerk and two other men, thugs from the look of them. She ducked into another alley, her mind racing, trying to remember the layout of the town. She was a stranger here, lost in a maze of shadows, and the hunters knew every corner. Meanwhile, back at the edge of town, Thomas waited. The minutes stretched into an hour. He knew something was wrong. Clara was smart, she was careful, but this was taking too long. Just as he was about to go after her, he saw it. A dark plume of smoke rising into the night sky from the center of town, and it was coming from the direction of the mining office. "No," he whispered. He leaped onto his horse and galloped toward the chaos. Clara was trapped. She had run into a dead-end alley. A high brick wall stood in front of her, garbage bins on either side. She turned, panting, as the three men blocked the entrance to the alley, their figures silhouetted by the distant glow of the fire. "Nowhere left to run, old woman," the clerk sneered. "Mr. Thorne wants his book back." Clara clutched her satchel. They were advancing on her slowly, enjoying her fear. "Give us the book and we'll make it quick," one of the thugs said, pulling a long, wicked-looking knife from his belt. Clara looked at the knife, then at their faces. She saw no mercy there. This was it. Her life, which had stretched over 50 lonely years, was going to end here, in a filthy alley, for a book. But it wasn't just a book. It was justice for Sarah. It was freedom for Thomas and the boys. It was worth fighting for. With a defiant cry, she grabbed the lid of a metal garbage bin and hurled it at them. It clanged uselessly against the wall, but it made them pause for a second. In that second, she did the last thing they expected. She didn't cower. She charged. She ran straight at the man with the knife, her size, for once, an advantage. She slammed into him with the force of a battering ram, knocking him off his feet. The other two were so surprised they just stared for a moment. That was all the time she needed. She scrambled past them and out of the alley, back onto the main street. The street was in chaos. People were shouting, pointing at the fire. A volunteer bucket brigade was forming, and in the middle of it all, she saw him, Thomas on his horse, his face a mask of frantic worry as he scanned the crowd. "Thomas!" she screamed, her voice raw. His head snapped in her direction. Relief washed over his face, quickly replaced by alarm as he saw the men chasing her. "Ride, Clara, ride!" he yelled, galloping toward her. He reached the alley just as her pursuers spilled out onto the street. Without slowing, Thomas leaned down from the saddle, holding out his arm. "Grab on!" She grabbed his arm, and with a strength born of desperation, he hauled her up onto the horse behind him. The thugs were right on them, grabbing at the horse's reins. Thomas kicked out, his boot connecting with the man's jaw. The horse reared, screaming, and then bolted, thundering down the street and out of town, leaving the shouts and the fire and Jasper Thorne's rage behind them. They rode hard, not stopping until the lights of Silver Creek were a faint glow behind them. Thomas finally pulled the horse to a halt in a moonlit clearing, and Clara slid off, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands checking her for injuries. "No," she panted, clutching the satchel. "But they know. Thomas, they know everything." She pulled out the journal. "And it's worse than we ever imagined," she told him. Standing there in the pale moonlight, she told him about the entry, about the poison, about how his wife had been murdered. Thomas listened, his face slowly turning to stone. The grief, the anger, the guilt, it all condensed into a single terrifying expression of cold, hard resolve. He didn't rage. He didn't weep. He just stood there, the truth settling over him like a shroud of ice. He took the journal from her, his hand surprisingly steady. He opened it to the page she had marked. He read the words his enemy had written. And in that moment, the quiet, grieving rancher disappeared. In his place stood someone else, a man pushed beyond the edge of reason, a man with nothing left to lose. "He didn't just take my wife," Thomas said, his voice a dead, emotionless whisper. "He made me watch." He looked up at the sky, then back at Clara, and his eyes held a new light. Not of a man seeking justice, but of a man seeking vengeance. "This doesn't end with the law," he said, his voice flat and final. "The sheriff works for him. The judge is in his pocket. There's no one to bring him to justice." He closed the journal with a soft snap. "Except me." Clara's blood ran cold. "Thomas, what are you going to do?" He looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she felt a flicker of fear. Not of him, but for him. The kindness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a chilling emptiness. "I'm going to finish this," he said, "the way men like us finish things out here, tonight." He was going to kill Jasper Thorne. He was going to get himself killed in the process, leaving his sons orphans. "No," Clara said, grabbing his arm. "Thomas, think of Caleb and Luke. You can't leave them. We have the proof now. We can show it to everyone. We can turn the town against him." "This town?" he spat, the bitterness poisoning his voice. "This town stood by and laughed when he shamed you. They stood by while he squeezed my ranch dry. They'll stand by and watch him bury me too, as long as his silver keeps flowing. They don't care about justice. They care about money." He was right. She had seen the cowardice on the train platform. She had seen it in the store owner's eyes. But she couldn't let him throw his life away. "Then we run," she pleaded. We take the boys and we run. We can start over somewhere else, somewhere he can't find us, and live my life looking over my shoulder." Thomas shook his head, a grim finality in his expression. "Let my sons grow up knowing their father was a coward who let their mother's murderer walk free? No, it ends here, in this valley." He swung himself back onto the horse. "You go back to the ranch, Clara. Bar the doors. Keep the boys safe. Don't open it for anyone but me." "Thomas, please," she cried, but he was already turning the horse around, back toward the faint glow of the town. "I made a promise to my wife that I would see you were safe," he called back over his shoulder. "I broke that promise once. I won't do it again. Jasper Thorne will never threaten you, or my sons, again." And then he was gone, a dark shape galloping into the night, riding toward a confrontation he might not survive. Clara was left standing alone in the clearing, the terrible weight of the situation crashing down on her. She had come here seeking a quiet life and had instead ignited a firestorm that was about to consume the only good man she had ever known. She couldn't let it happen. She couldn't hide at the ranch while Thomas faced Jasper alone. She had started this. She had to find a way to finish it. But how? Jasper had the men, the guns, the power. She and Thomas had a book that was useless if they were both dead. She thought of the townspeople, of their fear and their greed. Thomas was right. They wouldn't help him. They would turn a blind eye. But then she thought of someone else. Sam, the shift supervisor at the mine, the man who owed his daughter's life to Sarah Brody. He had helped them once, secretly. Would he help them again, out in the open? And what about the other miners? The men Jasper underpaid and overworked. They hated him. They were afraid of him, yes. But what if their hatred was stronger than their fear? A desperate, wild plan began to form in her mind. A plan even more audacious than stealing the journal. Thomas thought the only way to win was with a gun. But Clara knew there was a weapon far more powerful than a bullet. The truth. She just had to make sure everyone heard it. Clara didn't go back to the ranch. She ran, back towards the town. She avoided the main road, circling through the woods, her mind a frantic storm of planning. Thomas was going after Jasper. That meant he was probably heading for the saloon where Jasper held court, or for Jasper's house. It was a suicide mission. Thomas was one man against an army of paid thugs. She had to get to Sam first. She knew the miners lived in a camp of small, rough shacks on the other side of town, near the entrance to the mine itself. She made her way there, sticking to the shadows, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The fire at the mining office seemed to be under control now, but the town was still buzzing with an uneasy energy. Men with rifles were patrolling the streets. Jasper's men. They were looking for her, and for Thomas. She found the miners' camp. It was a grim, bleak place. She found Sam's shack by asking a tired-looking woman who was drawing water from a communal pump. She knocked on his door, her heart in her throat. Sam opened it, a big, burly man with weary eyes. He recognized her instantly, and his face went pale with fear. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, trying to pull her inside. "They're looking for you. Thorne's men are everywhere." "I know," Clara said, pushing her way past him into the small, cramped room. "Thomas has gone after him, alone. He's going to get himself killed." Sam's face hardened. "That's Brody's choice. I did what I promised. I got you in. I'm not risking my neck, or my family's, anymore." "This isn't just about Thomas anymore, Sam," Clara said, her voice low and urgent. She pulled out the journal. "Jasper Thorne didn't just try to cheat Thomas out of his land. He murdered his wife. He murdered your daughter's nurse. He poisoned Sarah Brody." She opened the journal and shoved it into his hands. "Read it." Sam's eyes scanned the page. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. The hand holding the journal began to tremble. That, that monster, he breathed. He looked up at Clara, the fear in his eyes being burned away by a slow-burning rage. He killed Mrs. Brody. In cold blood, Clara confirmed. And he'll kill Thomas tonight, and then he'll come for me, and anyone else who knows the truth. Are you going to let that happen, Sam? Are you going to let him get away with murdering the woman who saved your little girl? The question hung in the air. Sam looked at the journal, then back at Clara. He was a man trapped, but Clara was offering him a way out. Not an easy way, but a right one. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice rough. "Gather the men," Clara said, her plan solidifying in her mind. "The ones you trust, the ones who hate Jasper as much as you do. Tell them what he did. Show them the proof. Thomas thinks a gun is the only answer. He's wrong. 100 angry men with pickaxes and shovels are more powerful than any gun." "They're scared, ma'am," Sam said. "Jasper will fire them all. Blacklist them." "Not if they all stand together," Clara insisted. "Not if the mine stops running. He can't fire all of you. His power comes from the silver you dig out of the ground for him. Without you, he is nothing." She saw the spark of an idea ignite in his eyes. He was seeing it, the possibility. "Where is Brody now?" Sam asked. "I think he's gone to the saloon," Clara said. "We have to stop him before he does something foolish. We need to face Jasper together, all of us." While Sam went to wake the other miners, a different confrontation was brewing. Thomas didn't go to the saloon. He knew that was Jasper's territory, filled with his men. He went to the one place he knew Jasper would be, the smoldering ruins of the mining office. Jasper was there, directing the cleanup, his face black with soot and fury. His men were all around him. Thomas rode his horse right up to the police line, dismounted, and walked straight toward his enemy. He was holding a rifle. "Thorne!" he yelled, his voice echoing in the tense silence. Every head turned. The townsfolk, the bucket brigade, Jasper's thugs. They all froze. Jasper turned slowly, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in. Come to finish the job your woman started, Brody." "I've come for you," Thomas said, his voice deadly calm. He raised the rifle. "This is for Sarah." Jasper's men instantly raised their own guns, a dozen rifles all pointing at Thomas's chest. "You're a fool, Brody," Jasper sneered. "You're outnumbered. You shoot me, you won't live another 5 seconds. And what happens to your precious boys then?" It was the one threat that could stop Thomas in his tracks. He hesitated, his finger on the trigger, his face a mask of anguish. Jasper was right, he could get his revenge, but it would cost his sons their father. And in that moment of hesitation, Jasper's men began to close in, forming a tight circle around Thomas. He was trapped, but just as they were about to rush him, a new sound filled the air. A low rumble like distant thunder. It grew louder and louder. It was the sound of marching feet, of angry voices. A river of men was flowing down the main street toward them. It was the miners. Led by Sam and walking right beside him, her head held high, was Clara. They were carrying lanterns, pickaxes, sledgehammers. They looked like an army risen from the earth itself. The crowd parted before them. Jasper's face, so smug just a moment before, turned to a mask of disbelief. His hired guns looked nervously at the approaching mob. They were paid to be bullies, not to fight 100 enraged miners. Clara and Sam stopped at the edge of the circle, facing Jasper. "It's over, Thorne," Sam boomed, his voice carrying over the crowd. "We know what you did." Clara held up the leather-bound journal. "We all know," she cried, her voice ringing with a strength she never knew she possessed. "This man didn't just cheat you out of your wages. He is a thief and a murderer. He poisoned Sarah Brody, a woman who only ever showed him kindness." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Whispers turned into angry shouts. "Lies!" Jasper bellowed, his face turning purple with rage. "It's a trick. This woman is a criminal. This man is a grief-crazed fool." "Is it a lie, Mr. Thorne?" Clara shouted, her eyes locking on the town doctor, who was standing at the edge of the crowd, looking terrified. "Why don't you tell them? Tell them about the special medicine you prescribed for Mrs. Brody on Jasper's orders." The doctor shrank back, his face white. His silence was all the confession anyone needed. That was the breaking point. The fear that had held the town in its grip for so long finally snapped. The miners surged forward. Jasper's men, seeing the tide turn so decisively against them, lowered their guns and backed away, melting into the crowd. They weren't going to die for Jasper Thorne. Suddenly, Jasper was alone, facing Thomas, Clara, and the entire town he had terrorized. He looked from the journal in Clara's hand to the cold, murderous promise in Thomas's eyes, to the mob of miners ready to tear him limb from limb. The power he had built, the fear he had cultivated, it had all crumbled to dust in a single night. He did the only thing a coward could do. He ran. He shoved his way through the crowd, making a break for his horse. But Thomas was faster. He tackled Jasper, sending them both crashing to the ground. They rolled in the dirt, fists flying. Thomas, fueled by years of suppressed rage and grief, was a man possessed. He was going to kill him. Right there, in front of everyone. "Thomas, no!" Clara screamed, running to them. "Don't! Don't become him! He's not worth it!" The miners pulled Thomas off the sputtering, beaten Jasper. Thomas struggled for a moment, his eyes still wild, but then he looked at Clara. He saw her face, he saw his sons' faces in his mind, and the madness receded. The sheriff, who had been hiding, finally pushed his way through the crowd. But he didn't go to Jasper. He went to Thomas. "Give me the book," he said to Clara, his voice shaking. Clara clutched it to her chest. "He works for Jasper," a man in the crowd yelled. "Not anymore," the sheriff said, his eyes filled with a newfound shame and a flicker of courage. "No one does." He took the journal from Clara's hand, walked over to the pathetic, blubbering Jasper Thorne, and slapped a pair of handcuffs on his wrists. "Jasper Thorne," he said, his voice loud and clear for all to hear, "you're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Brody." A roar of approval went up from the crowd. Justice. It had finally come to Silver Creek. In the aftermath, the town of Silver Creek was reborn. The spell of fear Jasper Thorne had cast was broken. The miners, led by Sam, formed a cooperative to take over the mine's operation, ensuring fair wages and safe conditions for everyone. The town began to heal. Thomas Brody was no longer seen as a broken man, but as a hero who had stood up to a tyrant. And Clara was no longer the fat woman from the train station. She was the woman who had brought a monster to justice. She was respected, admired. She and Thomas returned to the ranch, to the two boys who were waiting for them. The home that had been a refuge now became a place of peace. The shadows of the past were gone, replaced by the promise of a future. One evening, a few weeks later, Thomas led Clara and the boys up to a small hill overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and pink. He turned to her, his eyes clear and full of a quiet, profound love. "Clara," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't have a diamond ring. I can't promise you a life of luxury, but I have a home and a heart that you and my wife saved. I have a family that is already yours." He got down on one knee in the soft grass. Caleb and Luke stood beside him, their faces beaming. "Clara May Thompson," he said, taking her hand, "will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Clara's face. They weren't tears of sorrow or humiliation. They were tears of joy. She looked at this good, strong man. She looked at the two boys who already felt like her own sons. This was the life she had dreamed of, a life she had thought was impossible. "Yes, Thomas," she whispered. "Yes." The boys cheered and rushed into their embrace, a tangle of arms and happy laughter. Under the vast, colorful sky, they were no longer four broken people. They were one family, forged in fire and bound by love. Clara's story wasn't about a cruel letter anymore. It was about the courage to stand up, the strength to fight back, and the beautiful, surprising truth that sometimes your real life begins on the very day you think it has ended. It just goes to show that a person's worth is never measured by the judgment of a crowd, but by the love in their heart and the courage to rewrite their own ending. If this story of hope and redemption touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales from the Wild West. And let us know in the comments below, what do you think is the true measure of a person's strength? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching.